Imagination that people's desire for change has diminished, or that the process of change has diminished. But it's a process which is going to go on for some years and not just for a few months. And it's a process which they'll try and stop, including stopping by subverting movements and by armed intervention. So that in Syria you have both the desire for people, certainly for an end to the bloodshed, certainly for democratic rights and for change, but you also have billions of dollars of intervention by Saudi Arabia and Qatar in particular to try and subvert this and turn it into a sectarianised civil war taking place in Syria. And then on the back of that, to say that we should have, well, what? A so-called no-fly zone, various forms of so-called humanitarian intervention of the kind that were done in Libya, which led not to the end of killing inside Libya, but 30,000 people killed in Libya, and the fragmentation of the country, the better to serve the interests of the oil companies and so on. So all of this, I think, is very important, and it's very important that we continue to take a stand against it, and particularly a stand in Britain, because there are many things that we can say about the world, and many discussions in the discussion period. People might want to explore various different things around politics in Europe, politics in other countries and so on, and it's quite right that we do that. But I think we need to remember we do so from the standpoint of being involved in a political struggle in our own country against people who not only oppress people inside Britain, but historically and continue to oppress people around the world. One of the significant imperial powers, even though the British Empire has come to an end, although I don't think anybody's told David Cameron, who's reinstated the British Empire medal, I think, this week. I suppose it says a lot about the British establishment, that they haven't got a British Empire, but they can have a British Empire medal, and they can tie themselves to Washington and believe that they're doing something globally. So these things remain important, because it's an anchor, I think, for us in direct opposition to the establishment here. And this isn't an insignificant question, because Respect is, in the sense of a radical left party, it's part of the family tradition of parties, resting upon ordinary people, resting upon working class people, opposed to the way that society is organised. And you know, George has often put it that in many of our values, it's like real labour. And I know that's how many people feel in Bradford. You know, we stand for what Labour used to stand for, standing up for working people, saying there's them and us and so on. That's true, it's very important, but when it comes to the question of war, even if we talk about real labour, opposing wars has never been even real Labour's very good tradition. In fact, the big dividing line in the whole history of the left and people standing for change has often been about the question of war. So we shouldn't underestimate the fact that because we stand foursquare against that, that in itself is a very important contribution and a radical contribution. But all of that's taking place in a context of, well, you know, I'm not going to attempt to go through any kind of long economic analysis, but Sir Mervyn King, the Governor of the Bank of England, said, you know, the bow tie to the city, Great and the Good on Thursday night, that these are the worst economic conditions outside of wartime. So the worst economic conditions outside of the London Docklands on fire, Clydeside on fire, and the Luftwaffe bombing the country. That's his description. Putting money reserved, put aside to go into the banking system because they fear that there could be such an economic collapse next week that quite literally, I'm not saying this is going to happen, I don't want to be responsible for ATMs running out of money in Bradford, but they quite literally fear that you could turn up to the hole in the wall next week and there's no money because money's been withdrawn, because we're in the depths of an economic crisis, the whole austerity offensive across Europe and indeed beyond, which Salma and George and others were talking about this morning. And this is generating now very, very significant resistance. So various different levels. First of all, people taking to the streets, people going on strike, people defending their communities in various different parts of occupying public spaces. The idea of the occupation of the Westfield site. Sure, even the people who were the first people in there would acknowledge that that idea didn't come from Bradford. It came from the occupation of Tahrir Square in Cairo, and then the occupation of the square in the centre of Athens and so on, that this is what we should do. They're privatising everything. They're taking away everything that belongs to the public. We should reoccupy the public space, physically and politically, take back what really belongs to really belongs to us. This is a feeling which has developed, and very many movements developed, particularly in Southern Europe, which is bearing the brunt of the austerity. So that's the first thing, and I don't think it's not something which we need to labour, but that I think we all feel, whenever we see anybody, anywhere in the world, standing up for themselves, that we instinctively are on their side. And more important than that, I think, is that I think respect has a role to play in explaining more generally why other people should be on their side as well. Because it's quite possible that tomorrow a party which in a broad sense is similar to respect in terms of the policies that we stand for, could be elected in Greece. It could be the party which is in pole position to form a government. And if that happens, then I think that the European elites will treat Greece like the Gaza of Europe. They've already tried to suspend elements of democracy. You can't have an elected Prime Minister who's strong enough to impose these savage cuts, so we'll have a banker who's never been elected to anything and make him your Prime Minister. This is in a country which had a military coup back in the 1960s. So things that we thought were, and our parents thought were behind us, military coups, fascists. To say something about the fascists in Greece, they're not even neo-Nazis. There's nothing neo about them. When they got a councillor elected in Athens, this is a capital city in Europe which was occupied by the Nazis during the Second World War, and thousands of people, including 40,000 of the Jewish population, were murdered under the Nazi occupation. He felt able to walk into the city hall in Athens and literally zeke out. And these people were able to get 7% of the votes at the last election. It will go down now, but able to get 7% of the vote because of people's despair, because of the scapegoating, and so on. I think we feel instinctively that we stand with people who are resisting all of that, and can explain that unlike what's going to be pumped out and has been pumped out, the profligate Greeks who spent too much money and so on, that they have to pay for the mistakes that they've made, that's not the reason why people are facing austerity. In fact, we're facing the same thing here, only they are 2 or 3 years further down the line. In essence, if you think of the black hole at the centre of Bradford, that's what's happened to the whole of Greece as a country. And so we reject the idea that people who work the longest hours in Europe for the least pay in Europe are in any sense responsible for the European big business and their own big business squeezing them and bleeding them any further. And those are very important arguments that I think we need to make. The third thing is that these are not arguments that only we are making. There's a development now across Europe of people rejecting the whole idea that austerity as Selma brilliantly put it, that if you're bleeding, if you're bleeding from the arm, that if you cut off your arm, in some sense that will staunch the bleeding. This is what the austerity is doing across Europe. More and more people are rejecting that. See, 2 years ago, even a year ago, there was something of a consensus across all of European and British politics that was the only thing that you could do. It wasn't entirely shared, people like us opposed it and what have you, but we were almost lone voices. Then you had, on the back of people going into the streets and saying no, independent economists saying no, and now it's reflected in the outcome of important elections. So in France, the elections that have just taken place for the presidency, there are two important things in this regard. One is that a figure standing for the president, a man called Jean-Luc Mélenchon, who, don't want anybody to take this the wrong way, but if you wanted to understand him, he's sort of like a French George Galloway. If you think of the kind of things that George was saying, those are the kind of things that Jean-Luc Mélenchon was saying in France. He was able to garner a very significant vote. More importantly than that, his intervention, him voicing those arguments in the election, meant that the equivalent of the Labour Party figure had to sound a bit more like him. Not enough like him, but a bit more like him, to say that we have to have some growth, we have to have some investment in France, not just endless austerity. It's cracked open the whole monolith. There's something else that's important, I think it's an important lesson from France, which I touched on this morning in a contribution, which is the way these things are said. See, Jean-Luc Mélenchon, just before the final rally that he held, 2 days before the election, spoke to, I think, 120,000 people in the centre of Paris, in the Place de Bastille. And the reason those people had gathered, I think, is not just because he's saying things that they agreed with, but the way that he was saying it and his preparedness to match that with the idea that we're part of resisting, that we're going to take action. And it was summed up brilliantly that one of the business papers in France put to the Francois Hollande, the kind of more mild candidate, saying, well, is what you're saying dangerous for the finance markets in France? And he went out of his way to say, no, there's no danger from me to the Paris Stock Exchange, to the financiers and to the bankers. The same question was put to Jean-Luc Mélenchon, and he said, I want the financiers to understand one thing, I'm dangerous.